December 19, 1944. A freezing afternoon in Verdun, France. General Dwight Eisenhower stood at the head of a long table, surrounded by the most powerful military commanders in the Allied forces. The news was catastrophic. 3 days earlier, Hitler had launched the largest German offensive since 1940. Over 200,000 German soldiers had smashed through American lines in the Ardennes forest. The 101st Airborne Division was now surrounded at Bastogne, a critical crossroads town. If Bastogne fell, the German army could split the Allied forces in two. The situation was desperate. Eisenhower's face was grim as he looked around the table. General Omar Bradley sat to his right, pale and shaken. British Field Marshal Montgomery lounged with his usual arrogance. And then there was George S. Patton. While other generals looked defeated, Patton looked like a predator who had just spotted prey. Eisenhower turned to him. "George, I want you to command this move. When can you attack?" The room fell silent. Every general knew the logistics. Third Army was currently engaged in heavy fighting 100 miles south of Bastogne. To disengage from battle, turn 90 degrees north, move over frozen roads in the middle of winter, and launch a coordinated attack was considered militarily impossible. Patton didn't hesitate. On December 22, he said, "With 3 divisions." The room erupted. Bradley shook his head. "George, don't be fatuous." Montgomery smirked. "My dear Patton, perhaps American impetuosity is confused with military competence. Such an operation requires weeks of planning." Patton leaned forward, his voice cold as the winter wind outside. "Gentlemen, I've already made my plans. My staff has had contingency orders prepared for over a week. On December 22, my 4th Armored Division will break through to Bastogne. I stake my reputation on it." Eisenhower studied Patton's face. "All right, George. The fate of the 101st Airborne is in your hands. If you fail, those men die." Patton stood up and saluted. "I won't fail, Ike. Those paratroopers are going home for Christmas." Behind him, he heard Montgomery's voice. "The man is insane. He'll never make it." If you're watching this and you want to know how Patton pulled off the impossible, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one. December 19, 1944. 8 p.m. Third Army Headquarters. Patton burst through the door like a hurricane. "Gentlemen," he announced, "we are moving north. We attack Bastogne on December 22. One of his division commanders protested. "Sir, that's 72 hours from now. We're currently engaged with the enemy. We need to disengage, move 100 miles north through winter storms, and attack a heavily defended position. It can't be done." Patton fixed him with a stare that could melt steel. "Cannot is not a word in my vocabulary. We will do this because we must. Those paratroopers at Bastogne are Americans. They are surrounded. And they are waiting for us." What Patton didn't tell them was that he had been preparing for exactly this moment. 1 week earlier, Patton had done something no other Allied commander had done. He had ordered his staff to prepare 3 contingency plans for a German breakthrough in the Ardennes. His intelligence officer, Colonel Oscar Koch, had been tracking suspicious German movements for weeks. 15 panzer divisions had gone missing. Radio silence across the entire German front. Patton had seen the signs. And while every other general dismissed the warnings, Patton had prepared. Within hours, coded messages were transmitted across Third Army's network. Over 133,000 soldiers. Over 11,000 vehicles. Hundreds of tanks. All moving through one of the worst winters Europe had seen in decades. Captain Charles Odom, a tank commander in the 4th Armored Division, later described what happened. "We were in the middle of an attack when the orders came through. Disengage. Turn north. Move immediately. We couldn't believe it. But that's exactly what we did." All across Third Army's front, American units broke contact with the enemy and began moving north. And Patton was everywhere. He drove from unit to unit in his jeep, sleeping only 2 hours a night. He screamed at officers who moved too slowly. He shared cigarettes with exhausted soldiers. He stood in freezing rain directing traffic personally. "Drive like hell," he told everyone. "Those boys at Bastogne are counting on us." December 20th, 1944. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Freezing rain turned roads into skating rinks. Tanks slipped off roads into ditches. Soldiers who had been fighting for weeks without rest now drove 20 hours straight, their hands frozen to steering wheels. But they kept moving. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams pushed his Sherman tanks forward through conditions that would have stopped any normal military movement. When a tank broke down, they pushed it off the road and kept moving. Nothing stopped the column. By the evening of December 20th, Third Army had moved 50 miles north. Eisenhower's staff officers were stunned. They had expected the movement to take a week. Patton had done it in 36 hours. December 21st, 1944. German intelligence had no idea what was happening. They believed Third Army was still engaged in fighting to the south. Patton held a final commanders' conference. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "tomorrow we attack? The 101st Airborne has been surrounded for 6 days. They are running out of ammunition, medical supplies, and time. We are going to break through to them." One colonel asked, "Sir, what if we can't break through? What if the German defenses are too strong?" Patton's answer was immediate and absolute. "Then you will die trying. Because we don't leave Americans behind. Ever." December 22, 1944. 6 a.m. The attack began. American artillery opened fire with a barrage that shook the frozen ground. Then the tanks rolled forward. Captain Odom's tank was in the lead element. "We hit the German defenses like a sledgehammer," he later wrote. "They were dug in deep. But we didn't stop. We couldn't stop. We just kept pushing forward." The fighting was brutal. German defenders fought with desperate courage. American tank crews fought through minefields, through anti-tank positions, through infantry counterattacks. Wounded men refused evacuation. And still they moved forward. Patton was right behind the front lines. When units stalled, he appeared personally to drive them forward. "Attack, attack, attack," he screamed. "Don't give them time to dig in." By the evening of December 22nd, Third Army had torn a hole in the German defensive line. But Bastogne was still 20 miles away. For 3 days, the 4th Armored Division fought mile by bloody mile toward Bastogne. Soldiers fought in waist-deep snow. Tank engines froze. Wounded men froze to death before medics could reach them. But still they advanced. In Bastogne itself, the 101st Airborne was in desperate condition. Acting Commander Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe had famously responded to a German surrender demand with a single word: nuts. But courage alone doesn't stop artillery shells. The paratroopers knew Patton was coming. They just didn't know if he would arrive in time. December 26, 1944. 4:45 p.m. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams' lead Sherman tank crested a hill south of Bastogne. Through his periscope, he saw American paratroopers waving frantically. "Contact with friendly forces," he reported. "We're in Bastogne." The siege was broken. When the first tanks rolled into town, paratroopers swarmed them, pounding on the armor, crying with relief. These were hardened combat veterans who had been fighting surrounded for a week. "And when we arrived, grown men were crying," Captain Odom wrote. Patton called Eisenhower immediately. "Ike," he said simply, "we're in. The siege is broken." Eisenhower's voice was thick with emotion. "George, you did it. No other general alive could have pulled this off." Later that evening, Eisenhower told his chief of staff, "Patton is the finest battlefield commander I've ever seen. When disaster strikes, he's the only man I completely trust." Montgomery had predicted failure. Bradley had thought it impossible. Every textbook said it couldn't be done. But Patton had done it anyway. In just 7 days he had moved over 100,000 men through the worst winter conditions in decades and relieved a besieged American division. The Battle of the Bulge would continue for another month with over 80,000 American casualties. But Hitler's last great offensive had been stopped. And the man most responsible was George S. Patton. After the war, historians asked Patton's staff how they had pulled off the relief of Bastogne. Major General Hobart Gay gave the simplest answer: General Patton believed it could be done. When your commanding general believes something is possible and demands it be done, you find a way to do it. That's the difference between good leadership and great leadership. On December 26, 1944, every military expert said moving an army 100 miles in 72 hours was impossible. Patton proved them all wrong. Not because he had more resources. Not because he had better troops. But because he had the audacity to demand the impossible and the leadership to make it happen. That is why Patton was a legend. That is why, 80 years later, we still tell his story. If this story inspired you, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that like button and drop a comment. What impossible challenge are you facing right now? Remember Patton standing in that frozen headquarters, promising to do what everyone said couldn't be done. Remember what he told his soldiers: courage is fear holding on a minute longer. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay curious about history.